The thundering hooves of Faith Nelson's stolen mare echoed through the Arizona desert, as the first light of dawn painted the horizon in fiery hues. Her wedding veil now a tattered flag of rebellion streaming behind her, like a banner proclaiming her newfound freedom from a future she never chose. Arizona Territory, 1874. Faith's heart pounded against her ribs as she urged the horse faster, the desert landscape blurring around her. The arranged marriage to Harold Whitcomb, a man 30 years her senior with cold eyes and colder hands, was now miles behind her. Along with the suffocating life her father had planned without once considering what she wanted. "Just a little farther," she whispered to the exhausted horse, though she had no destination in mind beyond away. Her elaborate wedding dress, once pristine white and adorned with pearls and lace, was now torn and dust-covered, the skirts hiked up immodestly to allow her to ride astride. 3 days of hard riding had left her disoriented, dehydrated, and growing increasingly desperate. The water in her canteen had run out yesterday, and the merciless sun beat down without pity. Faith had grown up in Boston, sheltered and unprepared for the harsh realities of the frontier her father had dragged her to 6 months ago when he decided to expand his banking empire westward. As the sun climbed higher, Faith's vision began to swim. The mare stumbled, clearly as exhausted as she was. In the distance, Faith thought she saw the shimmer of water, but she knew better than to trust desert mirages. Still, she had no choice but to continue forward or die where she sat. When the horse finally collapsed beneath her, Faith barely managed to throw herself clear. She landed hard on the packed earth, the breath knocked from her lungs. As she lay there, staring up at the cloudless sky, Faith Nelson accepted that she might die here, alone in the desert, but at least she would die free. The shadow that fell across her face came so suddenly that at first, Faith thought it was death itself coming to claim her. Instead, when she forced her eyes to focus, she found herself looking up at a man astride a paint horse, his features obscured by the sun behind him. "You are far from anywhere a woman like you should be," he said, his voice deep and accented but his English clear. Faith tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a rasp. The man dismounted in one fluid motion and knelt beside her, lifting her head and bringing a canteen to her lips. "Small sips," he instructed. "Too much will make you sick." The water was warm but felt like heaven on her tongue. As she drank, Faith studied her rescuer. His copper skin was weathered by the sun, his black hair longer than any white man would wear it, pulled back with a leather cord. He wore buckskin pants and a cotton shirt that had seen better days, and a knife hung at his belt. His eyes, dark and intelligent, watched her with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. "You are running," he stated rather than asked, glancing at her ruined wedding dress. Faith nodded weakly. "They wanted me to marry. I couldn't." "The horse is done," he said, looking over at the mare who lay panting in the dust. "Mine can carry us both to water." Without waiting for her response, he gathered Faith into his arms as if she weighed nothing and lifted her onto his horse before swinging up behind her. His arm circled her waist to steady her, and despite her predicament, Faith felt a flutter of something unfamiliar at the contact. "I am Makya," he said against her ear as he turned the horse. "It means eagle hunter in my language." "Faith," she managed to reply. "Faith Nelson." "Faith," he repeated as if testing the word. "Hold tight, Faith Nelson. The water is not far." As they rode, Faith drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the solid presence behind her, keeping her from falling. When they finally stopped, she heard the blessed sound of running water. Makya helped her down and supported her to the small stream that cut through the rocks. After she had drunk her fill and bathed her face, Faith felt coherent enough to truly look at her surroundings. They were in a small canyon, sheltered from the worst of the sun by towering red rock walls. The stream, though narrow, ran clear and cool. "You know how to make fire?" Makya asked, already gathering dry brush. Faith shook her head. "I'm afraid I don't have many useful skills out here." His lips quirked slightly. "Then it is good I found you." As Makya built a small fire, Faith gathered the courage to ask, "Are you Apache?" He nodded once. Western Apache, I scout for the army at Fort Verde, he gestured to her dress. Your husband will be looking for you. He's not my husband, Faith said firmly. I ran before the ceremony. And yes, they're probably searching for me. Makya considered this as he worked. Why did you run? Faith hugged her knees to her chest. My father arranged the marriage. Harold Whitcomb owns half the territory's copper mines. He's powerful, wealthy, and cruel. He's buried 2 wives already. She shuddered. I would rather die out here than live as his possession. Makya was silent for a long moment. Among my people, a woman has a voice in who she will marry. That sounds wonderful, Faith said wistfully. As night fell, Makya offered her jerky from his pack and a blanket to ward off the desert chill. They sat in companionable silence watching the flames. Tomorrow I will take you to the fort, he finally said. From there you can decide your path. Faith nodded, though the thought of returning to civilization filled her with dread. Her father's influence reached far and Harold's even farther. There would be few places she could hide. Thank you, she said, for saving my life today. Makya nodded once. Sleep now, morning comes quickly. Faith awoke to the sound of voices, male voices speaking rapidly in a language she didn't understand. She opened her eyes to see Makya conversing with 2 other Apache men. When he noticed she was awake, he came to her side. These are my brothers, he explained. They bring news. Your father has men searching the territory for you. They offer rewards. Faith's stomach tightened with fear. What will you do? The reward must be substantial. Makya studied her face. Do you think I would sell you for money? I don't know you, Faith answered honestly, but most men would. Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps respect for her candor. I am not most men, he gestured to the others. My brothers say there is a patrol of white men near. We must move quickly. Within minutes, they had extinguished the fire and erased all signs of their presence. Makya helped Faith onto his horse, but this time mounted another that one of his brothers had brought. My brothers will take your mare back toward town, Makya explained. The men will follow that trail while we go another way. They rode hard through the morning, following game trails and dry riverbeds that Faith would never have noticed. By midday, they had climbed into pine-forested mountains that offered blessed shade from the sun. Where are we going? Faith finally asked when they paused to rest the horses. To my people's camp, Makya replied. It is safe there. Faith hesitated. Will they welcome a white woman? You will be under my protection, he said simply, as if that settled the matter. They continued their journey through the afternoon, climbing higher into the mountains until they reached a secluded valley. Smoke from cooking fires rose among the cluster of Wikiup's dome-shaped dwellings that Faith had only read about in books. As they approached, Faith felt curious eyes upon her. Women paused in their work, children stared openly, and men regarded her with suspicion. Makya spoke rapidly in Apache, explaining something that caused the tension to ease slightly. An elderly woman approached, her face a map of wrinkles but her eyes sharp and assessing. She spoke to Makya, who answered respectfully. This is my grandmother, he told Faith. She says you may stay in her Wikiup. The old woman gestured for Faith to follow her. Inside the dwelling, it was dim but surprisingly cool. The woman pointed to a pile of blankets in one corner, clearly indicating where Faith should rest, then left them alone. My grandmother asks why you still wear the dress of unwanted marriage, Makya translated. She offers clothes. Faith looked down at her ruined wedding gown, suddenly eager to be rid of it. Please thank her, I would be grateful. Makya nodded and left, returning shortly with a bundle of soft leather and cloth. I will wait outside. The clothes, a simple deerskin dress and moccasins, were more comfortable than anything Faith had worn in years. When she emerged from the Wikiup, Makya's eyes widened slightly. It suits you, he said simply. That evening, Faith sat by the communal fire, observing the life of the camp around her. Children played, women worked hides or wove baskets, men repaired weapons and tools. There was a harmony to their existence that felt foreign to her structured upbringing. Makya's grandmother brought her a bowl of stew, some kind of game meat with wild onions and unfamiliar roots. It was delicious, and Faith realized how hungry she had been. Thank you, she said to the old woman, who nodded as if she understood. Later, as the camp settled for the night, Makya found Faith still sitting by the dying fire, staring into the embers. "You should rest," he said, sitting beside her. "You are safe here." "For how long?" Faith asked. "I can't impose on your people indefinitely, and Harold won't stop looking for me." Makya was quiet for a moment. "There are options, such as you could go north to Colorado Territory. Or west to California," Faith sighed. "With what money? I have nothing but the clothes your grandmother gave me." Makya studied her face in the firelight. "There is another way among my people. If a woman takes shelter in a man's wickiup, she becomes his wife." Faith stared at him, startled. "Are you proposing marriage?" "It would be a marriage of protection only," he clarified. "As my wife, you would be Apache in the eyes of my people. The white man's laws would not reach you here." "Why would you do this for me?" Faith asked, bewildered by his offer. Makya's gaze was steady. "I have seen how white men treat their women, like property. You have courage to choose your own path. This I respect." It was pragmatic rather than romantic, but Faith found herself considering it seriously. Would such a marriage be recognized by white authorities? No, he admitted. But they would have no authority here, and I have standing with the army as a scout. It offers some protection. Faith looked around at the camp, at this life so different from anything she had known. "I know nothing of your ways. I would be useless as a wife." "You would learn," he said simply. "And I ask nothing of you but to respect our customs." The offer hung between them, unexpected and yet strangely appealing, a solution where she had seen none. "May I think about it?" she finally asked. Makya nodded. "Of course, but decide soon. We cannot hide your presence forever." That night, lying on the blankets in his grandmother's wickiup, Faith considered her options. Return to white society and risk being found by her father or Harold, try to escape to another territory with no resources, or accept Makya's offer of protection through a marriage in name only. In the morning, Faith found Makya repairing a saddle outside his own wickiup. "I accept your offer," she said without preamble. "I will become your wife in the Apache way if the offer still stands." Makya looked up, his expression unreadable. "You are certain?" Faith nodded. "I am. I know it's not a real marriage, but I am grateful for your protection." "Among my people, marriage is simpler than for whites," Makya explained, setting aside his work. "The couple exchanges gifts, shares food, and the woman moves into the man's dwelling. That is all." "What gift could I possibly give you?" Faith asked. "I have nothing." Makya thought for a moment. "The knowledge you carry is a gift. You can read and write English." "Yes," Faith nodded. "Of course." "Then you will teach me and any children of the camp who wish to learn. That is your gift." It was so simple, so practical, and yet Faith felt unexpectedly moved by the exchange. "And your gift to me, protection," he said. "And this." He reached into a pouch at his belt and withdrew a small item wrapped in soft hide. When he unwrapped it, Faith gasped softly. It was a pendant on a leather cord, a small piece of turquoise set in silver, simply but beautifully crafted. "It was my mother's," Makya said quietly, "before she died." Faith was overwhelmed by the significance of such a gift. "Makya, I can't accept something so personal." "If you are to be my wife, even in name only, it is fitting," he insisted, holding it out to her. With trembling fingers, Faith took the necklace and slipped it over her head. The stone rested cool against her skin. "Thank you," she whispered. That afternoon, with minimal ceremony, Faith Nelson became Makya's wife in the Apache tradition. They shared a meal prepared by his grandmother, and Faith moved her few belongings into his wickiup. The simplicity of it was a stark contrast to the elaborate wedding she had fled, and she found herself appreciating the lack of spectacle. That first night, Makya laid extra blankets on the opposite side of the wickiup from his own sleeping place, respecting the boundaries of their arrangement. "Sleep well, wife," he said, the words sounding strange between them. "And you," Faith replied, equally awkward. In the days that followed, Faith began to find her place in the Apache camp. Makya's grandmother, whose name she learned was Nasha, took Faith under her wing, showing her how to grind corn, prepare hides, and weave baskets. The work was hard but satisfying in a way that embroidery and piano lessons had never been. True to her word, Faith began teaching English to anyone who wanted to learn. Each afternoon, she sat under a large pine tree with a group of children and a few adults, including Makya. She used a stick to write letters in the dirt, teaching them to read simple words and write their names. Makya proved to be an excellent student, already possessing basic reading skills from his work with the army but eager to improve. Faith found herself enjoying their lessons, impressed by his quick mind and thoughtful questions. As the weeks passed, Faith and Makya settled into an unexpected companionship. They shared meals, worked side by side during the day, and talked by the fire in the evenings. Though they maintained their separate sleeping areas, Faith became aware of a growing attraction to her husband in name only. It wasn't just his physical presence, though that was certainly part of it. Makya moved with a natural grace that made even the simplest tasks look elegant, but it was his quiet strength, his intelligence, and his unwavering kindness that drew Faith to him more each day. One evening, as they sat outside their wickiup watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Makya asked, "Are you happy here, Faith?" The question surprised her. "Yes," she answered honestly. "Happier than I've been in a very long time." "You do not miss the comforts of your old life," Faith considered this. "Sometimes I miss hot baths and books, but those are small things compared to what I've gained." "What have you gained?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Freedom," she said immediately. "Respect, purpose." She glanced at him shyly. "Friendship." Something warmed in Makya's eyes. "These are no small things." "No," Faith agreed. "They're everything." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken feelings. Then Makya stood, breaking the tension. "Come. My grandmother has invited us to eat with her tonight." As autumn approached, bringing cooler temperatures to the mountains, Makya began spending more time away from the camp, scouting for the army. Faith worried each time he left, relief flooding her when he returned unharmed. During one of his absences, Faith was gathering berries with Nasha when the old woman spoke in halting English words she had been learning from Faith's lessons. "My grandson," she said, gesturing to her heart. "He look at you, different now." Faith felt her cheeks warm. "Different?" Nasha nodded, her eyes knowing. "Man look, husband look." Faith wasn't sure how to respond. Had Makya's feelings changed, or was his grandmother seeing what she wanted to see? "Our marriage is for protection," Faith reminded her gently. Nasha shook her head firmly. "Protection first, now more." She patted Faith's hand. "You see." When Makya returned 3 days later, Faith watched him more carefully, looking for signs of what Nasha had suggested. He seemed the same as always, respectful, kind, maintaining the boundaries they had established. And yet, she caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his expression unguarded in a way that made her heart beat faster. That night, Faith found the courage to broach the subject as they sat by their private fire. "Your grandmother has been teaching me many things while you were gone," she began. Makya smiled. "She likes you very much." "She told me something interesting," Faith continued, gathering her nerve. "She said you look at me differently now, like a real husband would look at his wife." Makya went very still, his eyes fixed on the fire. For a long moment he said nothing, and Faith feared she had overstepped. "My grandmother sees much," he finally said, his voice low. "Perhaps too much." "Is she wrong?" Faith asked softly. Makya raised his eyes to meet hers. "No," he admitted. "She is not wrong." Faith's breath caught in her throat. "Why haven't you said anything?" "Our arrangement was for protection only," he reminded her. "I gave my word to respect that. What if?" Faith hesitated, then pressed on. "What if I wanted more than that now?" Makya studied her face intently. "Do you?" Instead of answering with words, Faith moved to sit beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. Slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wished, she leaned in and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when Makya's hand came up to cradle her face, it deepened into something more urgent. When they finally parted, both were breathing heavily. "I have wanted to do that for many weeks," Makya confessed, his thumb tracing her cheekbone. "Why didn't you?" Faith asked. "Among my people, it is often the woman who decides when a marriage becomes real," he explained. "I waited for your sign." Faith smiled, taking his hand in hers. "Consider this my sign." That night, for the first time, they shared the same sleeping place, their separate blankets pushed together to form one bed. As Makya's arms encircled her, Faith felt a sense of homecoming she had never experienced before. Their marriage, begun as a pragmatic arrangement, blossomed into something neither had anticipated. Faith discovered in Makya a passionate yet gentle lover, a man who valued her mind as much as her body. And Makya found in Faith a partner who challenged him, respected his ways, and loved him with an openness that healed old wounds. Winter came to the mountains, bringing snow and long nights spent huddled together for warmth. Faith learned to make stews that could simmer all day, to tan hides so they stayed soft, to mend clothing with tiny, even stitches. And in the privacy of their wickiup, she and Makya explored each other with increasing boldness, their initial shyness giving way to intimate familiarity. It was during the deepest part of winter that Faith first suspected she might be carrying Makya's child. Her monthly cycle, always regular, had not come for 2 months, and certain foods that she had previously enjoyed now turned her stomach. She confided her suspicions to Nasha, who placed weathered hands on Faith's still flat abdomen and nodded sagely. "Strong child," she pronounced. "Boy." That evening, Faith waited nervously for Makya to return from hunting. When he entered their wickiup, bringing a blast of cold air with him, she helped him remove his snow-covered outer garments. "Husband," she said, using the Apache word he had taught her, "I have news." Makya looked at her expectantly, warming his hands by their small fire. "I believe I am carrying your child," Faith said, watching his face carefully. For a moment, Makya seemed frozen in place. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his usually serious expression into one of pure joy. He crossed to her in 2 strides and lifted her into his arms, spinning her in the small space. "A child," he repeated, setting her down gently. "Our child." His hands went to her stomach, reverent. "When?" "Late spring, I think," Faith said, covering his hands with her own. Makya knelt before her, pressing his forehead to her abdomen. He spoke softly in Apache, words Faith didn't understand but recognized as a blessing. When he stood, there were tears in his eyes. "I never thought to have this," he admitted. "A woman who chose me, a child of our blood." Faith felt her own eyes fill with tears. "Nor did I," she whispered. "When I ran from that wedding, I thought I was running from any chance at family." Makya gathered her close. "The Great Spirit had other plans for us both." As winter gave way to spring, Faith's body changed with her growing child. The women of the camp shared herbs to ease her morning sickness and stories to prepare her for motherhood. Makya hovered protectively, insisting she rest more and taking on additional tasks to spare her. It was during this time that the outside world intruded on their peaceful existence. Makya returned from a scouting mission with troubling news. "Harold Whitcomb has not given up his search," he told Faith as they sat by their fire. "He has hired Pinkerton detectives to find you." Fear, long dormant, rekindled in Faith's chest. "After all this time, it's been nearly a year." "Men like him do not accept defeat," Makya said grimly. "His pride is wounded." Faith rested her hands on her swollen belly. "What should we do?" Makya was silent for a long moment. "We have options. We could go farther into the mountains where white men rarely venture, or we could face this threat directly." "How?" Faith asked. "I could take you to Fort Verde," Makya suggested, "as my legal wife under American law. Once our marriage is recognized by their authorities, Whitcomb would have no claim on you." Faith considered this. "Would they perform such a ceremony, a white woman and an Apache man?" "The chaplain at the fort is a fair man," Makya said, "and I have earned some respect there. It is worth trying." The journey to Fort Verde was slow, accommodating Faith's condition. They traveled with 2 of Makya's brothers as escorts, taking frequent breaks and avoiding the main trails. Fort Verde was a stark collection of adobe and wooden buildings surrounded by a stockade wall. As they approached, Faith felt the stares of soldiers and civilians alike. A white woman in Apache dress, visibly pregnant, riding beside an Apache scout was clearly an unusual sight. The guard at the gate recognized Makya and admitted them with minimal questions. Makya led them directly to the office of Captain James Wilson, the officer he reported to as a scout. Captain Wilson, a weathered man in his 40s, looked up in surprise as they entered. Makya, he acknowledged, then his eyes moved to Faith. And who might this be? This is Faith, Makya said simply. My wife. The captain's eyebrows rose. Your wife. When did this happen? By Apache custom, nearly a year ago, Makya explained. We have come to make it legal in the white man's way as well. Captain Wilson studied them both carefully. This is highly unusual. Yet not impossible, Makya countered. The captain drummed his fingers on his desk. The lady hasn't spoken. Is this truly your wish, madam? Faith stepped forward. It is, Captain. I love Makya and carry his child. We wish our marriage to be recognized under territorial law. There's more to this story, the captain said shrewdly. Faith hesitated, then decided honesty was their best approach. My name is Faith Nelson. My father is Jeremiah Nelson, the banker. Last year I fled an arranged marriage to Harold Whitcomb. Recognition flashed in the captain's eyes. The Nelson girl who disappeared, there were rewards posted. Yes, Faith admitted. Makya found me dying in the desert and saved my life. Over time we fell in love. Captain Wilson leaned back in his chair. Whitcomb still has men looking for you. He's a powerful man in the territory, which is why we need legal protection, Makya interjected. As her lawful husband, I would have rights that even Whitcomb must respect. The captain considered this. I'll speak to the chaplain. No promises, but I'll see what can be done. He looked at Faith again. In the meantime, Mrs. Nelson, there are quarters for officers' wives where you can rest. You appear to need it. Faith was grateful for the offer. The journey had been taxing, and the baby had been particularly active today. The chaplain, Reverend Thomas Green, came to visit them that evening in the small room they had been assigned. He was a kindly man with spectacles and a thoughtful demeanor. Captain Wilson has explained your situation, he said after introductions were made. This is most unusual but not unprecedented. There have been legal marriages between whites and Indians before, though they often face considerable prejudice. We understand that, Faith said, her hand finding Makya's. We're prepared for the challenges. The Reverend nodded. Very well, I am willing to perform the ceremony tomorrow. However, there is the matter of the marriage license. Is that a problem? Makya asked. It requires a trip to the county seat, Reverend Green explained, and questions might be asked if Miss Nelson's name is recognized. Then perhaps I could use another name, Faith suggested, just for the license. The Reverend looked uncomfortable. That would be fraudulent. What if I took Makya's surname? Faith asked. Surely a woman can choose to be known by her husband's name. Lincoln, Makya said suddenly. My surname for Army records is Lincoln. Faith looked at him in surprise. He had never mentioned this before. It was given to me when I first became a scout, he explained. The officer said every man needs a last name on paper. Faith Lincoln, she tried the name. I like it. The Reverend seemed relieved by this solution. That would be perfectly acceptable. I'll arrange for the license tomorrow morning and we can have the ceremony in the afternoon. After he left, Faith turned to Makya. Lincoln, after the president, Makya nodded. The officer admired him, said he tried to be fair to all people. It's a good name, Faith said, then laughed softly. Though I never thought I'd have a husband with an English surname. Does it trouble you? Makya asked. Faith shook her head. No, it's just one more unexpected turn in a life that has become far more interesting than I ever imagined. The next day, Faith and Makya were married by Reverend Green in a simple ceremony in the fort's small chapel. Captain Wilson and the doctor's wife served as witnesses. Faith wore a borrowed dress that barely accommodated her pregnant belly, and Makya wore his scout's uniform, cleaned and pressed for the occasion. The words were different from their Apache ceremony, but the commitment was the same. When the Reverend pronounced them man and wife, Makya kissed Faith with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. Their legal marriage certificate in hand, they prepared to return to the Apache camp the following day. But as they were packing their few belongings, a commotion at the fort gate drew their attention. Captain Wilson appeared at their door, his expression grim. Whitcomb is here, he said without preamble. With a lawyer and several men, he's demanding to see you, Mrs. Lincoln. Faith's hand went protectively to her belly. What does he want? To contest the marriage, I imagine, the captain said. But you're legally wed now, he has no claim on you. Makya's jaw tightened. I will speak with him. No, Faith said firmly, we will speak with him together. In the captain's office, Harold Whitcomb looked much as Faith remembered a large man with a florid face and cold eyes. He was expensively dressed, his watch chain gleaming gold against his vest. Beside him stood a thin man with a pinched expression whom Faith assumed was the lawyer. So it's true, Whitcomb said when he saw her, his eyes taking in her pregnant condition with visible disgust. Jeremiah's daughter has turned savage. Faith lifted her chin. Mr. Whitcomb, I see you still haven't learned to accept rejection gracefully. The lawyer stepped forward. Miss Nelson, Mrs. Lincoln, Faith corrected firmly. This so-called marriage is a farce, the lawyer continued as if she hadn't spoken. Entered into while you were clearly not of sound mind. Your father is prepared to welcome you home and overlook this unfortunate episode. My mind is perfectly sound, Faith replied. And I have no desire to be welcomed back to a home where I was treated as property to be bartered. Whitcomb's face darkened. You were promised to me, a contract was signed. By my father, not by me, Faith countered. And that contract became void the moment I left. I am a married woman now, Mr. Whitcomb, legally married before God and witnesses. My husband and I are expecting our first child. There is nothing more to discuss. You've ruined yourself, Whitcomb spat, living like an animal with these savages. No decent white person will ever accept you again. Makya, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward. You will not speak to my wife in this manner, Whitcomb sneered. Your wife, she's a white woman who's forgotten her place, and you're enough, Captain Wilson interrupted sharply. Mr. Whitcomb, you're on military property. I suggest you moderate your language and behavior. The lawyer tugged at Whitcomb's sleeve. Perhaps we should discuss this privately, sir. Whitcomb shook him off. There's nothing to discuss. She's made her choice to be a savage whore instead of a respectable man's wife. Before anyone could react, Faith crossed the room and slapped Whitcomb hard across the face. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. I would rather be Makya's wife than your widow, she said, her voice shaking with anger. He is twice the man you will ever be. For a moment, it seemed Whitcomb might strike her back. Makya moved with lightning speed to position himself between them, his hand on the knife at his belt. You would be wise to leave now, he said, his voice dangerously soft. Captain Wilson moved to the door and opened it. I believe this meeting is concluded, gentlemen. The lawyer practically dragged Whitcomb from the room, but at the door, Whitcomb turned back. This isn't over, Faith. Your father will hear of this disgrace. When they were gone, Faith's legs nearly gave out beneath her. Makya caught her, guiding her to a chair. Are you all right? He asked, concerned. The baby, Faith nodded, one hand on her abdomen where their child kicked vigorously. We're fine, just shaken. Captain Wilson poured her a glass of water. That was quite a confrontation, Mrs. Lincoln. I admire your spirit. Will he cause more trouble? Faith asked after taking a sip. The captain shrugged. He may try, but legally there's little he can do. Your marriage is valid and registered. As a married woman, you're under your husband's protection by law. The irony wasn't lost on Faith. The same laws that had once made her father's control of her complete now protected her through her marriage to Makya. Thank you, Captain, Makya said, for your assistance and fairness. You're one of my best scouts, Lincoln, the captain replied, and I've never cared much for Whitcomb's type. Too many men think money entitles them to whatever or whoever they want. They left Fort Verde the next morning, eager to return to the mountains and the safety of the Apache camp. Faith felt lighter somehow, as if confronting Whitcomb had exorcised the last of her old fears. You think he'll really contact my father? She asked Makya as they rode. Perhaps, Makya replied. Would that trouble you? Faith considered this. I don't know. I haven't spoken to my father since I fled. Part of me wishes he could know I'm happy that I've found a good life, but another part fears his rejection. Makya finished for her. Faith nodded. Yes, though it seems silly to care after all this time. He is still your father, Makya said. Such bonds are not easily severed, even when broken. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves a soothing counterpoint to Faith's thoughts. "Whatever comes," Makya finally said, "we will face it together." The words were simple but powerful, a reminder of the partnership they had forged first out of necessity, then through respect and finally in love. Their return to the Apache camp was celebrated with a feast. Nasha had apparently told everyone about their journey to make their marriage legal in the white man's way, and the tribe seemed to approve of their efforts to secure additional protection. As spring gave way to early summer, Faith's time drew near. The women of the tribe prepared special teas and gave her advice for an easier birth. Makya became increasingly protective, rarely letting Faith out of his sight. The birth, when it came, was long and difficult. Faith labored through a day and night, attended by Nasha and 2 other experienced women. Makya waited outside as was custom, pacing anxiously, praying to both the Apache spirits and Faith's Christian God for the safety of his wife and child. Just as dawn broke on the second day, a lusty cry announced the arrival of their son. Nasha proudly carried the infant to Makya, wrapped in a soft deerskin blanket. "Strong boy," she proclaimed, placing the tiny bundle in his arms. "Like father." Makya stared down at his son in wonder. The baby had a shock of black hair and copper skin a shade lighter than his own. When the infant opened his eyes, Makya saw they were the same clear blue as Faith's. "Faith," he asked anxiously. "How is she?" "Tired," Nasha replied, "but strong. Go to her." Inside the wickiup, Faith lay on their sleeping mats, pale but smiling. Makya knelt beside her, their son cradled in one arm. "He's beautiful," Faith whispered, reaching out to touch the baby's cheek. "Like his mother," Makya replied, his voice thick with emotion. He carefully transferred their son to Faith's arms. "What shall we call him?" Among the Apache, children were often not named until they showed their character, sometimes receiving several names throughout their lives. But Faith and Makya had decided to give their child both an Apache name and an English one. "Edward," Faith suggested. "After my grandfather, he was a kind man," Makya nodded. "Edward," he thought for a moment, then added, "Ahiga for his Apache name, it means he fights." Edward Ahiga Lincoln, Faith tried the name. A strong name for a strong boy. As summer progressed, little Edward thrived. He was a good-natured baby with a healthy appetite and curious eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. Faith recovered her strength quickly, resuming her duties in the camp and continuing her English lessons, now with Edward strapped to her back. One hot August afternoon, Faith was teaching under the shade of the pine tree when Makya rode into camp with unusual haste. His expression was serious as he dismounted and came directly to her. "What is it?" Faith asked, immediately concerned. "There is a visitor at the fort," Makya said. "For you." Faith's heart skipped a beat. "Whitcomb again?" "No," Makya shook his head. "Your father." Faith stared at him, unable to process his words. "My father, here in Arizona," Makya nodded. "Captain Wilson sent word. Jeremiah Nelson arrived yesterday asking about you." Faith sat down abruptly, her legs unsteady. Edward, sensing her distress, began to fuss in his carrier. She automatically reached back to soothe him. "What does he want?" she asked. "I don't know," Makya admitted. "The captain said only that he seemed genuine in his desire to see you. He told your father you were married and living with my people, but not where to find you." Faith appreciated the captain's discretion. "I don't know what to do," she confessed. "Part of me wants to see him, but another part is afraid," Makya finished. "It is your choice, Faith. You owe him nothing." Faith considered her options. For nearly 2 years, she had lived without her father's presence or influence. She had built a new life, found love, created a family. Did she want to risk disrupting that by reopening old wounds? And yet, there were questions only her father could answer. Why had he been so determined to marry her to Whitcomb? Did he regret his actions? Had he truly searched for her or only given up when it was convenient? "I want to see him," she decided finally. "But not alone. Will you come with me? Bring Edward." Makya took her hand. "Of course. We are a family. We face this together." They set out for Fort Verde the next morning, Edward securely wrapped against Faith's chest. The journey was slower with the baby, but Faith welcomed the extra time to prepare herself mentally for the reunion. At the fort, Captain Wilson greeted them with his usual gruff courtesy. "He's been staying in town," he informed them. "I've sent word that you're here. He should arrive shortly." Faith paced nervously in the captain's office, adjusting Edward's blanket though he was perfectly comfortable, checking her appearance in a small mirror on the wall. She wore a dress made of soft deerskin, beautifully decorated with beadwork that Nasha had helped her create. Her hair, longer now than she had ever worn it in Boston, was braided and wrapped around her head in the Apache style. "You look beautiful," Makya assured her, sensing her anxiety. Before Faith could respond, the door opened, and Captain Wilson ushered in Jeremiah Nelson. Faith barely recognized her father. In less than 2 years, he seemed to have aged a decade. His once robust frame had thinned, and his hair, previously dark with just touches of gray at the temples, was now almost completely silver. But his eyes, Faith's eyes, were the same piercing blue. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Then Jeremiah took a halting step forward. "Faith," he said, his voice breaking on the single word. "My God, it's really you." Faith remained where she was, one hand protectively on Edward. "Hello, Father." Jeremiah's eyes moved to the baby, then to Makya standing protectively at Faith's side. Something like pain flashed across his features. "You have a child," he said softly. "I'm a grandfather." "This is Edward," Faith said, her voice steadier than she felt. "And this is my husband, Makya Lincoln." Jeremiah nodded to Makya, who returned the gesture with careful neutrality. "May I?" Jeremiah hesitated. "May I see him?" The baby, Faith hesitated, then gently shifted Edward so his face was visible to her father. Jeremiah moved closer, his eyes drinking in the sight of his grandson. "He has your eyes," he said, wonder in his voice. "Yes," Faith agreed. "Why are you here, Father?" Jeremiah straightened, seeming to remember himself. "To find you, to make sure you're safe. When Whitcomb returned from his trip here, he was quite vocal about finding you living among the Apache." "I imagine he was," Faith said dryly. "Disappointed he couldn't drag me back to his bed." Her father flinched at her bluntness. "Faith, there are things you don't understand." "Then explain them to me," she challenged. "Explain why you were so determined to sell me to a man old enough to be my father, a man known for his cruelty." Jeremiah glanced at Captain Wilson and Makya. "Perhaps we could speak privately?" "No," Faith said firmly. "My husband stays. Captain Wilson can leave us if he wishes." The captain took the hint and excused himself. When the door closed behind him, Jeremiah sighed heavily. "The banking venture in Arizona was failing," he admitted. "I had overextended, made poor investments. Whitcomb offered a solution, a substantial investment in exchange for your hand in marriage." "So you did sell me," Faith said flatly. "I thought I was securing your future," Jeremiah protested. "Whitcomb is wealthy, influential, and cruel," Faith interrupted. "Did you know his previous wives died under suspicious circumstances? Did you care?" Her father looked genuinely shocked. "No, I didn't know. There were rumors, but nothing substantial." "You didn't bother to investigate the man you were giving your daughter to," Faith said, her voice cold. "Because the money was more important." Jeremiah had no defense for this. He slumped into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "You're right," he said quietly. "I failed you as a father when you disappeared." He swallowed hard. "I thought you were dead. The desert, the wild animals, hostile Indians, I imagined the worst. Instead, I was saved by one of those hostile Indians," Faith said, her tone softening slightly as she looked at Makya. "He found me dying in the desert and brought me back to life. His people welcomed me, and over time we fell in love." Jeremiah studied Makya with new eyes. "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay, sir." Makya inclined his head. "Faith is strong. She has built a good life with my people. Are you happy?" Jeremiah asked Faith, genuine concern in his voice. "Yes," Faith answered without hesitation. "Happier than I ever thought possible. I have a husband who respects me, who values my thoughts and feelings. I have a beautiful son. I have purpose and belonging." Jeremiah nodded slowly, absorbing this. "And the banking venture failed spectacularly," he admitted with a wry smile. "I lost nearly everything. I've been rebuilding more modestly in Tucson. And Whitcomb? After his return from seeing you, he made sure everyone knew of your disgrace," Jeremiah said, but it backfired on him. There were enough people who remembered his previous wives who questioned his character. When a Pinkerton detective he'd hired was caught trying to bribe an army officer for information about you, it caused a scandal. His mining interests have suffered. Faith couldn't help feeling a grim satisfaction at this news. "Good," she said simply. An awkward silence fell between them. Faith shifted Edward to her other arm, and the movement seemed to bring her father back to the present. "Faith, I came to ask your forgiveness," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "and to see if there was any way to repair what I've broken between us." Faith studied her father's face, seeing genuine remorse there. The anger she had carried for so long seemed suddenly heavy and unnecessary. "I don't know if things can ever be as they were," she said honestly. "Too much has happened, but perhaps we can build something new." For Edward's sake, if nothing else. Hope flared in Jeremiah's eyes. "I would like that very much." Faith glanced at Makya, who nodded his support. "Then you should come to our camp," she said. "Stay a few days, see how we live before you judge it." "I would be honored," Jeremiah said, sounding genuinely grateful for the invitation. The visit was not without its awkward moments. Jeremiah clearly found the Apache way of life primitive compared to his urban comforts, and some of the tribe regarded him with understandable suspicion. But he made a genuine effort, participating in communal meals, watching Faith's English lessons with interest, and most importantly, spending time with his grandson. On his last evening, as they sat by the fire outside Faith and Makya's wickiup, Jeremiah made an unexpected offer. "I have a small house in Tucson," he said. "Nothing grand but comfortable, if you ever wish to visit or if Edward might benefit from schooling in town when he's older." Faith was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Father, perhaps someday, for now our place is here." Jeremiah nodded, accepting her decision. "I understand, but the offer stands, always." As the years passed, Faith and Makya's family grew. Edward was joined by a sister named Ruth Taluta, combining Faith's mother's name with the Apache word for singing water. 2 years later came another son, Michael Bidziel, whose Apache name meant he is strong. The relationship with Jeremiah Nelson evolved into something neither Faith nor her father could have imagined. He visited twice yearly, bringing books for the children and taking a genuine interest in their lives. In return, Faith and Makya occasionally brought the family to Tucson, where Jeremiah had indeed established a modest but successful bank. Edward, growing into a thoughtful young man with his father's quiet strength and his mother's curiosity, found himself comfortable in both worlds. At 12, he began spending summers with his grandfather in Tucson, attending school and returning to the Apache camp with new knowledge to share. Faith's English lessons expanded into a small school for the Apache children, with the blessing of tribal elders who recognized the value of understanding the white man's ways while maintaining their own traditions. Makya continued his work as a scout, his position providing a bridge between the two cultures and offering protection for their unique family. In 1889, 15 years after Faith had fled her arranged marriage, the Lincoln family attended a special ceremony at Fort Verde. Captain Wilson, now Colonel Wilson, was retiring, and he had specifically requested their presence. At the reception following the formal ceremony, the colonel sought them out, shaking Makya's hand warmly and embracing Faith like an old friend. "I've been waiting for the right moment to give you this," he said, handing Faith a yellowed envelope. "It came to the fort about 5 years ago. I held on to it, unsure if you'd want to receive it." Faith opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a brief letter, Mrs. Lincoln, I write to offer my sincere apologies for my behavior toward you and your husband. Age and illness have a way of clarifying one's perspective, and I now recognize the arrogance and cruelty of my actions. I wish you and your family well. Harold Whitcomb, he died a month after sending this, Colonel Wilson added quietly. Consumption, I believe. Faith folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope. Thank you for giving me this." Later, as they walked back to their camp under a star-filled sky, Makya asked, "Are you all right?" Faith considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "It's strange. I carried anger toward him for so long, and now I feel nothing but pity." Makya nodded, understanding. "Time changes many things. Not everything," Faith said, taking his hand. "Some things only grow stronger." Makya smiled, squeezing her fingers. Like us, Faith agreed. That night, lying beside the man who had been her salvation, her partner, and her love for 15 years, Faith reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The desperate flight from a fate she couldn't accept had led her to a life richer and more fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. She had escaped an arranged wedding and fallen into the arms of an Apache scout who called her wife. And in that unexpected embrace, she had found her true home. Years later, when their children were grown with families of their own, Faith and Makya would tell the story of their beginning of a desperate bride fleeing through the desert, and the scout who found her dying in the dust. They would tell of the arranged marriage that never happened, and the marriage of convenience that became so much more. And their grandchildren, with their mixed heritage and feet in two worlds, would pass the story down to their own children, a tale of courage, of crossing boundaries, of finding love in the most unexpected of places. For Faith and Makya, who had defied convention and prejudice to forge their own path, it was proof that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single act of courage, the courage to reject what is expected and embrace what the heart truly desires. In the twilight of their lives, sitting together outside their home watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant hues of orange and purple, Faith would often think of that desperate young woman she had once been, racing away from a future others had chosen for her. "Do you ever regret it?" Makya would sometimes ask, knowing her thoughts. Leaving everything behind, and Faith would always smile, taking his weathered hand in hers, feeling the years of shared labor, shared joy, and shared love in its strength. "Never," she would say. "I wasn't running away, I was running toward you. I just didn't know it yet."